here. So for this live stream, I want to talk about the Supreme Court's ruling today. And basically, the Supreme Court struck down Harvard's and the University of North Carolina's affirmative action plans. And I want to just take out time to summarize the majority opinion, or at least take a quote from the majority opinion. From what I understand, that opinion is over 200 pages. I am going to read through the opinion eventually, but this is based on news reports and summaries of the decision. So I'm going to summarize the majority. I'm going to also point out some statements from the dissent, and then also highlight some statements that Clarence Thomas made with respect to this decision. So Judge Roberts, or Justice Roberts, basically wrote the opinion for the court. And in his opinion, he talked about how these plans lacked sufficient focus and measurable objectives warranting the use of race. And he talked about how race was used in a negative manner. He talked about how it was based on racial stereotyping, and he talked about the lack of meaningful endpoints. And then he went on to talk about how people need to be treated as individuals, not based on their race. And in her dissenting opinion, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson made the following statements. She talked about how today the majority pulled the ripcord and announced colorblindness for all by legal fiat. She also pointed out how deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it irrelevant in life. She goes on to say that having so detached itself from the country's actual past and present experiences, the court has now been lured into interfering with crucial work that UNC and other institutions of higher learning are doing to solve America's real world problems. And then Justice Sotomayor said that ignoring race will not equalize a society that is racially unequal. And then you had Clarence Thomas say this in his concurring opinion. He talked about how, he was criticizing the dissent, criticizing what Justice Jackson had to say. And he basically talked about how her dissent focuses on the historical subjugation of Black Americans. And then he talked about how she invokes statistical racial gaps to argue in favor of defining and categorizing individuals by their race. She sees things as if we're trapped in a fundamentally racist society with the original sin of slavery. And, he went on to talk about the historical subjugation of Blacks, how Justice Jackson views the historical subjugation of Blacks as determining our lives today. And then he went on to talk about how he strongly disagreed with that. So I just want to share some quick thoughts about this. First of all, this is a devastating decision. It is going to have a devastating impact on diversity in higher education, and it will probably have an effect on diversity within the public sector and private sector in terms of jobs and all that kind of stuff. Not only will it affect diversity for diversity's sake, it will impact the educational opportunities of Black people. We know based on other states that have outlawed affirmative action that those types of measures drastically reduce the numbers of African Americans that are able to get higher education. So we already know where this is headed. This is closing the door, or rather slamming the door of opportunity in the faces of Black students and Black people in general. And this is just yet another reminder of how important elections actually are. You have these fake pro-Black people, these extremists, for lack of a better word, basically discouraging people from participating in electoral politics. And by doing so, they empower our enemies. They put our enemies in a position where they are able to appoint conservative judges and justices, like these conservatives that rule to basically end affirmative action. That's basically what they have done. They have, made it very difficult to have affirmative action programs in colleges and universities. That's what they have done. And it was the conservatives appointed by Republican presidents that ruled to basically eliminate affirmative action. So these elections matter. And anytime somebody tells you that elections don't matter, you have to understand that they don't know what the hell they're talking about, or they are agents perpetuating the powerlessness and marginalization of their own people. So, yeah, it's just another reminder of how important these elections are, because these justices are appointed by the president. The federal judges are appointed by the president, and it's the Senate that confirms these people. All of those people are elected individuals. That's why these elections are so crucial. You know, when Trump was running for office, you had people basically talking about some don't vote campaign. And you had some of these people actually supporting Donald Trump. And these are the results of that kind of foolishness, where opportunities are being stripped away from African Americans. All kinds of human and civil rights are being reversed with this right-wing conservative Supreme Court. And basically what you have here is a situation where these conservatives, and Justice Roberts in particular, they are basically turning the Equal Protection Clause on Black people. They are basically weaponizing the Equal Protection Clause against the very people that it was designed to protect. The Equal Protection Clause was designed to give us certain civil rights, to give us citizenship rights, to give us protection of the law. And what these people are doing in the name of color blindness is that they are stripping African Americans of opportunity. We have to be clear what affirmative action was all about. Affirmative action is about promoting diversity at colleges and universities. It was never a quota system. It is not a quota system. It is not a system where people who are not qualified are getting some position solely based on their race. That is not what affirmative action is about. It's about opening an opportunity. Under these affirmative action programs, race was a factor of a factor considered by universities when deciding who to admit to the university. It was not a decisive factor. It was one of many factors. And that factor, as was concluded in prior cases, is important to promote a compelling interest, and that compelling interest is to promote diversity at colleges and universities. The end of diversity at colleges and universities not only impacts African Americans, it affects everybody. It affects the quality of education that all people receive. When you don't have diverse classrooms, you're only getting one perspective. You are not getting a full educational experience when you lack diversity on your campuses. And that is the direction that the Supreme Court is taking us. They are taking us backwards. This whole colorblind notion is nothing but neo-racism. In the name of being colorblind, in the name of saying that race shouldn't be considered, these people are actually implementing policies that are detrimental to Black people. These types of policies are going to make it difficult for Black people to get higher education. It's going to be more challenging for Black people to get admitted in these colleges and universities, as we have seen in states, again, that have eliminated affirmative action. So while they're touting all of this stuff about being colorblind and basically about how people should be judged as individuals, Black people as a collective are going to suffer the consequences of this detrimental decision. So this is absolutely outrageous. This is crazy that the Supreme Court would reach this decision, but it shouldn't be surprising. You know, this Supreme Court hasn't had much respect for precedent. We saw what happened in the Dobbs case when they basically got rid of and overruled Roe versus Wade, and here we are now where they're basically, for all intents and purposes, reversing past legal precedent, upholding affirmative action. And, you know, and I commend Justice Jackson and Justice Sotomayor for their powerful statements and their dissenting opinions, because the fact of the matter is race is very much a part of this society. In one of the opinions dealing with affirmative action, one of the justices said something to the effect that perhaps affirmative action needs to be around for 25 more years or whatever. They basically put a not official timetable, but like a timetable just based on arguments and stuff like that. And the fact of the matter is, affirmative action will continue to be necessary as long as we live in a racist, white supremacist society. It will continue to be necessary as long as our children are forced to go to substandard schools all these years after Brown versus the Board of Education. As long as resources are, unevenly and unequally distributed in this society, there will always be a need for affirmative action. As long as you have all these disparities in wealth, all these disparities in education, all of these disparities, period, in society, there will continue to be a need for affirmative action. And that's something that people like Uncle Clarence Thomas want to ignore. They want to ignore reality. They want to ignore the statistics that make it abundantly clear that Black people, even in this day and age, are still in a second-class status in this society. We still do not have the same educational opportunities as white citizens in this society. But yet and still, you have this Uncle Ruckus, Uncle Clarence Thomas telling you and me that we need to just be judged as individuals. We need to not have affirmative action, even though that man, Justice Thomas, benefited from affirmative action. He wouldn't be in law school. He wouldn't have gotten to law school if it wasn't for affirmative action. He wouldn't be a justice today if it wasn't for affirmative action. Let's be perfectly clear about that. But yet and still, after he has crossed the bridge into the land of success, he decides to burn down that bridge so it will be more difficult for African Americans to enter that success or to have those same opportunities that he had. And it's an absolute disgrace that we had this Black man who is basically an enemy of his own people. Every opportunity that Uncle Ruckus gets, He always takes that opportunity to rule against his people. And it's no surprise at all. Not at all. It's just crazy. This man was one of the votes that decided to gut the Voting Rights Act, and here he is today going along with eliminating a program that he benefited from. Now, some people have suggested that HBCUs may be an answer to this particular problem of affirmative action basically being eliminated. And I do support HBCUs, 100%. I graduated from an HBCU. I graduated from Howard University in DC. That's where I went to undergrad. So I fully support, historically black colleges and universities. But the fact of the matter is, all the black colleges and universities cannot accommodate all black college students. That's just a fact. And I do think we need to support HBCUs and more of us should go to them. But let's not pretend like if every black person went to a HBCU, we wouldn't have to worry about this affirmative action problem. That's simply not the case. And I'll get to your comments in a second. Another point is this, I hear people constantly say this. Like I posted a video on TikTok about this same issue. And I had, these people say, well, affirmative action primarily benefited white women. They keep emphasizing that. Just because a program benefits other people, that's no reason for us to overlook the ways that that particular program has benefited black people. Just because it benefits some white women doesn't mean you throw it out, doesn't mean it's no good. That's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Black people like me were able to go to law school because of affirmative action. We're able to do certain things because of affirmative action. And now that door is being slammed in the faces of black people. Now, some people, I was listening to CNN and they had a legal scholar on there and, some people on there talking about this particular issue. And one of the things that they said was that perhaps we could use other methods to achieve the same objective. Perhaps if we, for instance, take into account someone's economical position, and all these other factors that will help increase the numbers of black people at universities. The fact of the matter is, I think that the Supreme Court will probably outlaw those measures as too, based on them being a pretext for trying to recruit more African Americans. I think that that's probably what would happen in that case if people try those different methods. And from what everybody's been saying about this case, basically they carved out one exception that would provide some kind of basis for affirmative action. And they were talking about how people can mention race in their essays to apply for college. They can talk about the obstacles that they faced because of their race, and perhaps a university can take that into consideration on an individual basis. And they basically said that they would be judged as individuals and not based on their race. And I think that it's just a matter of time before the Supreme Court closes that door as well. I think that what universities need to do now is they need to comb through this opinion, go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and figure out how they can continue to have affirmative action programs at their universities without going against this opinion. Because, this thing, if affirmative action is completely wiped out, it just means that we're going to have less educated black people, less professional Black people. And that will have an overall destructive effect on the Black community as a collective. Yeah, so I just had to share my quick thoughts about this. So I'm going to go through the couple of comments that I see here. Okay, so Kavina Man said, I remember that people such as Cornel West and Nina Turner endorsed Jill Stein in 2016. That led to Trump being able to win states such as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. You know, in retrospect, I think that you make a valid point. I think that that is a very valid point. Because the fact of the matter is, as problematic as Hillary Clinton is, she would have been far better as president than Donald Trump for obvious reasons. Not only because, Donald Trump is a racist and a conservative, and he's appointed these judges that are ruling against our civil rights. But he also is, guilty of all kinds of things. He was found liable for sexual harassment, and then now he's being charged criminally for keeping top secret records and making them accessible to to people in his home and all that kind of stuff. And who knows what else he did with these highly important documents and stuff. So yeah, I think that you make a valid point. But the problem is the Democrats have to run better candidates as well, instead of giving us these problematic candidates like a Hillary Clinton. But I do take your point well. Your point is well made. And I actually opposed Hillary Clinton. I supported, I supported Bernie Sanders in the primaries, and when he lost, I can't even. Yeah, I probably did vote against her in the presidential election. I can't remember if I voted for her or Jill Stein. I probably voted for Jill Stein out of protest to her policies in support of the crime bill and all that kind of stuff. But here in Maryland, things are different than these other states, and my decision would not have the same impact as it would in other states. But your point is well made. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Beach Boy. It's just crazy that this would happen. Yeah, after all that our ancestors fought for opportunities to have education for, African American communities. Like people were celebrating Brown versus the Board of Education, which was a major decision. But here we are all these years after the Brown versus the Board of Education, and we still have segregated schools in America. We still have Black schools that are under-resourced and devalued, and we have these white schools that are affluent and prosperous. We still have two Americas. And here we have, affirmative action, which really is an extension of the promise of Brown, basically being eliminated. And it's absolutely crazy. But this is the Supreme Court. This is where we are today. Yeah, so I just wanted to share those quick thoughts with you all. I will be back on here shortly to do another live stream about the Carlisha Hood situation. I've talked about it on my TikTok page, but I want to go into more detail here on YouTube. So with that, please rate, comment, subscribe, like the video, share the video, and hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. Peace and blessings. Have a good evening.